Wikipedia has a list of 180 historical people who possess the title The Great. This list has 5 Roman emperors: Constantine, Valentinian, Theodosius, Leo, and Justinian. These are all good emperors in their own right, but they aren't exactly of the same caliber. Leo I, for example, isn't making it to any of the best emperors lists, but is still counted among the greats. So why these 5 and not any of the others? Let's delve into the histories to find out. You probably know that the Roman emperors had a lot of different titles. Some of them had legal meaning, some were conferred for great victories, and some were just expressions of gratitude from the Senate and the people of Rome. The most famous of the last category are the Augustus and the Optimus Princeps. The first one basically became synonymous with the imperial power, and the second one was given to Trajan as an acknowledgement of his excellence. Both of them were given by a decree of the Senate, so they were official and could be displayed on coins, for example. The only officially great Roman emperor is Constantine. The Senate proclaimed him Maximus Augustus after his victory over Maxentius. Constantine used this title in the documents and stamped the letters Max on his coins. Sometimes he is also referred to as Imperator Maximus and Maximus Princeps. An important point to make here is that Maximus actually means the greatest, rather than simply the great. The Latin word that is translated as the great is in most cases Magnus. And this brings us to the question of the greatness of the rest of the bunch. Valentinian, Theodosius, Leo, and Justinian are never referred to as Maximus. Neither are they called Magnus on any official documents or coins. Their claim to greatness comes from the works of historians, and the thing about historians is that they often disagree with each other. This is especially true for the period from Constantine I to Theodosius. The 4th century saw the empire being ruled by men of 3 different religious affiliations: the pagans, the Nicene Christians, and the Arian Christians. And whenever you read any of the primary sources about this period, you can always tell which religion did the historian himself follow. Arian historians hype up Constantius II and Valens. Nicene Christians all swoon over Valentinian, and especially Theodosius. And pagan Zosimus is the only person who calls Emperor Julian the Apostate the Great Julian. My favorite story of greatness is the one about Valentinian by the church historian Theodoret of Cyrus. He titles it Of Valentinian, the Great Emperor, but it isn't even about him being an emperor. Instead, it is about the time when Emperor Julian took Valentinian to visit the Temple of Fortune. At the entrance of the temple, there were servants who sprinkled the attendants with water, blessed by the priest of the pagan goddess. Valentinian was a very zealous Christian and was greatly opposed to the pagan rituals. When a drop of the temple water fell on Valentinian's cloak, he punched a temple attendant for defiling him. Theodoret says that this incident was the reason why Julian sent Valentinian to exile, but that God later rewarded Valentinian by making him the emperor. So Valentinian's claim to greatness isn't his military successes or putting down the great conspiracy, but beating up a temple servant for sprinkling him with funny water. Theodosius also receives some great praise from church historians, such as Theodoret, Socrates Scholasticus, and Sozomenes. And it is in their histories we first see those emperors being called the Great. But there is something peculiar about these titles. All these histories are written in Greek. The word that they use is O Megalos, and while it can be translated as the Great, it is probably more accurate to interpret it as the Elder. Notice how every emperor who gets to be called that in the Chronicle of John Malalas is also the first emperor of his name, and has a younger emperor with the same name. Valentinian has his son Valentinian II, while Theodosius and Leo both have grandsons Theodosius II and Leo II. Leo I isn't even covered as a particularly great emperor, but still gets the title O Megalos. On the other hand, Justinian has much more written about him, but he doesn't get this title. Even if we open a panegyric to him, such as Procopius's buildings, we can see a lot of nice epithets, but nowhere is he called the Great. In fact, the first written record of the Great next to Justinian's name is in the Chronicle of Theophanes the Confessor, written in the 8th century, after, you guessed it, the reign of Justinian II. Going back to the Chronicle of Megalos, we can actually see that there are even cities called Megalos. Well, you might say, the cities can't have children. This should mean that Megalos also means the great, and not only the elder. But notice that the only cities that have this title are Antioch and Alexandria. Not Jerusalem, Rome or Constantinople, but only those two. You probably know that Alexandria is the most popular city name in the ancient world, but the city of Antioch in Syria also shares the name with another place. There is a smaller Antioch known as the Antioch on the Meander. So Megalos applied to a city doesn't mean of particular greatness, but simply the greatest of its name. Same can be said about the emperors. The chroniclers of the late antiquity did not use regnal numbers. This custom was started by the papacy and became widely adopted only in the modern age. Instead, to distinguish between the emperors who had the same name, they called the first one Megalos. It was translated to Latin as Magnus and to English as the Great, so the Anglophone historians took it as meaning of particular greatness and equated this title to that of Constantine. For Edward Gibbon, Theodosius I is always the Great Theodosius, and J.B. Bury solidifies his reputation, while also adding Leo I to the list of the greats. All this is not to say that ancient historians didn't think Theodosius, Valentinian or Leo were good emperors. They certainly did so, but giving out title the Great was not the way they expressed it. So should we keep calling those emperors the Great? Frankly, it is for you to decide. The Great is the same nickname that some 200 other historical people have. Same primary sources I've mentioned give Valentinian a much better moniker, the Severe or the Harsh. And both Theodosius and Leo have nicknames based on their origins. Theodosius is the Spaniard, and Leo is the Thracian. I like those names better than all too common the Great, but it is a question of personal preference. Also, Constantine should absolutely be called the Greatest as befits his stature, and Justinian should be referred to by his church title, Saint Justinian the Emperor. Or if you believe Procopius' secret history, then a demon in human form is a more fitting nickname. So that's how some slight mistranslations resulted in a current list of the great emperors. I think it is important to know how those kind of titles come into being when we evaluate the careers of historical people. So join me for an upcoming series of videos where we will determine whether or not those emperors actually deserve the title the Great. Thanks a lot for watching, and I will see you in the next one.